And take a live look here on your screen. This is inside of that Trump rally happening in New Hampshire right now, Rochester, New Hampshire. And we're going to take a listen. Watch.
Cannot get in. We want to thank your fire department, actually. They've been great. You got a lot of people out there. That's like a poll, right? That's like a poll. So I just want to say a very special hello to New Hampshire. It's been a very important place for me. You remember 2016, we really had to come in here and win it, and we won it by 21 points. And the rest was history. We just went up and down the East Coast, through the Midwest we went through, and it was a beautiful thing to see. And I think even if you look at 2020, we did better in 2020 than 2016. I think that right now we have the highest level of enthusiasm that anybody's ever seen, ever, for a campaign. And the reason is they are so bad. They are destroying our country. We have the worst president in the history of our country, and he is destroying our country. I just told a very brilliant interviewer who might be right there. There he is right there. Lawrence, come here for a second. Come here. Get over here. He gave me a killer interview. Now, I just said that the happiest person with Biden is Jimmy Carter, because Jimmy Carter, his administration was brilliant by comparison. Before we begin, I'd like to take time to congratulate Ron DeSantis and, of course, a really terrific person who I've gotten to know, his wife, Casey, for having run a great campaign for president. He did. He ran a really good campaign, I will tell you. It's not easy. They think it's easy doing this stuff, right? It's not easy. But as you know, he left the campaign trail today at 3 p.m., and in so doing, he was very gracious, and he endorsed me, so I appreciate it. I appreciate that, and I also look forward to working with Ron and everybody else to defeat crooked Joe Biden. We will have to get him out. We have to get him out. He's put our country at great peril, So I just want to thank Ron and congratulate him on doing a very good job. It's a tough situation. It's a tough thing to do. I'm thrilled to be here in the home of the first in the nation primary. Do you know why you're first in the nation? Because of me. I kept you there, unlike Biden. I kept you there. First in the nation. That's right. And we're
all right, we are just there watching former President Trump. He's heading off a rally in Rochester, New Hampshire. Here we are, less than 48 hours before the voters go to the polls in the state. And rather kind remarks there about Ron DeSantis as DeSantis exits the race.
I would call that a conciliatory tone. He called DeSantis and his wife terrific people. He said they ran a great campaign over at DeSantis headquarters. And he was saying it's not easy. This is really hard to do. So he was sort of giving a tip of the cap, some props. He did say earlier in the day, I saw that the DeSanctimonious nickname is now officially retired. And look, knowing Donald Trump, I would guess that there's probably some gloating happening behind the scenes. But for public consumption, I think Trump recognizes in order to beat Joe Biden, it's not the layup that some conservatives think it will be. To beat Joe Biden, there will need to be unity on the right. And it starts with treating potential allies as they drop out, the way that we actually just heard from Trump, which is a little bit out of character for him, but I think strategically it makes sense.
Yeah, Kayleigh, what do you think? He wants perhaps the DeSantis 5 or 6% that's out there potentially for the taking.
He does, and I think he gets that. Look, that was definitely a conciliatory tone. It reminds me of his victory speech in Iowa, where he praised his opponents, praised his rivals. That's the kind of tone he will need for the next 9 months if he wants to prevail against Joe Biden. I think he gets the DeSantis voter, both in the primary and the general. The DeSantis voter tends to be a traditional conservative person of faith, and that naturally translates to Donald Trump. Where I think his challenge is, both here and going forward into a general election, is winning over the Nikki Haley voter, winning over the establishment voter, winning over the independent, which is why I think that vice presidential pick is so important. You must pick someone who helps to bring in that block, because I believe the conservatives, the base, is going to come home, show up rain or shine. You need the independent. You need the suburban women. You need that tone.
Yeah, and they are the people to watch here in New Hampshire as well. Kaylee, you've pointed out several times that what a strong voting bloc that is for New Hampshire, those independent voters, about 40% undeclared, and they can vote in the Republican primary. So we'll see what they ultimately do. But Charlie, your thoughts as we just watched, rather nice tone for DeSantis. And what do you think we'll hear about Nikki Haley in the coming day that's left before the polls open?
And of course, for a lot of those DeSantis voters, the reason they were supporting DeSantis is because they didn't think Donald Trump would win or could win or was going to get arrested and put in jail, so they were sort of banking on DeSantis. So if it winds up being Trump and he goes the distance, I think a lot of those DeSantis voters will not only go to Trump, they'll be delighted, they'll be happy to. They were sort of banking on something bad happening. But it is kind of interesting, for months now we've been talking about how nasty it's gotten between DeSantis and Trump, and a lot of people say, they could never patch things up. Oh, this is politics. They can patch anything up. I could absolutely, and I agree with you. I think that the vice presidential pick is going to be important this time. But I also think that, and I think that, nothing's out of bounds. Nothing is out of the question. Although I do think that he was a little bit Sherman-esque in eliminating Nikki Haley from the running as vice president the other day. I've never quite heard.
He said likely not. So there's still
no, but he said likely not. But there were some other things that he said around that made you think, man, this one you might not be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together on this one.
Yeah. Well, that which makes you wonder if he already has somebody else in mind that he's thinking of. What do you think?
I mean, there's a short list for sure. I think the scuttlebutt is that he's leaning towards a woman. I think that probably makes sense. Can I just say something about the term establishment? Because I know that people are framing Nikki Haley as the establishment person who's left in the race. Maybe, but if you look at who is now endorsing Donald Trump, it is the entire party at this point. I saw the campaign committees are behind him, the congressional leadership are behind him. So Trump is now the establishment. I'm not saying that as a pejorative. I think if you like the way that he is changing the establishment, that's one thing. But in some ways, she's maybe the old guard, but no longer the establishment, because the establishment of today's Republican Party is now lock, stock, and barrel behind Donald Trump.
So agreeing with you, but I think it's important to note that is the Republican Party that he has remade.
Oh, yeah.
And very much remade
very much so.
In his image.
Yeah,
Agreed.
and the challenge, too, is South Carolina, her own state. He's also got those big-name Republicans backing there in her state, and here we are a month away.
Yeah, it's like a home fest, a South Carolina home fest this weekend. You've got Henry McMaster, the governor of South Carolina. You got Tim Scott up here, all campaigning for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham has it right. It's like the whole, it's Trump's lining him up.
Yeah.
Okay, I think now President Joe Biden is skipping the Granite State primary, but supporters are desperately trying to drum up a write-in votes for him. But the effort may not go as far as the polling suggests. Young voters in New Hampshire would be angry if he won re-election. Lucas Tomlinson is live in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. At the beach, Lucas.
And Charlie, there's not exactly a lot of enthusiasm we're feeling here at the beach. President Biden went to Mass yesterday. We did not see a whole lot of large crowds since the president has been here. And, of course, his enthusiasm with young people has plummeted. Of course, President Biden is not on the ballot in New Hampshire. Might be due to his fifth-place finish in 2020 when he finished behind Elizabeth Warren and ahead of Tom Steyer. But I digress. Let's read this out here. Young people, 29% are angry with the president, 21% dissatisfied, 36% satisfied, and only 6% are enthusiastic. Now, Biden has the lowest approval rating in modern history for any president running for re-election, dating back those first national polls at the end of World War II. His vice president is even less popular.
I spent a lot of time with President Biden, be it in the Oval Office, in the Situation Room, and other places. He is extraordinarily smart. He has the ability to see around the corner in terms of what might be the challenges we face as a nation or globally.
Biden's deputy campaign manager claims the economy is a plus for the president.
I'm sure it's, not good for them to talk about an economy that's booming with job creation up, consumer sentiment up, inflation going down. It's much easier for them to talk about age than it is to talk about those things.
And here's John Kirby.
One of the things that President Biden has done very ably in the last 3 years is shore up alliances and partnerships and prove that American leadership on the world stage actually stands for something and can achieve results.
Now, President Biden went out for breakfast here in Rehoboth Beach. He ignored reporters' questions, including mine, which was, did he want people to write his name on the ballot in New Hampshire on Tuesday? Charlie?
Thank you, Lucas. Appreciate it. So, Molly, this is really amazing when you stop and look at what appears to be a lack of enthusiasm among Democrats, especially among young voters.
Yeah. And it's problematic, particularly for the Democrats, because they have always touted the youth vote as such a big part of their contingency, something they have bragged about and said that they want to get young people to the polls. This latest UNH polling shows that only 23% of those aged 35 to 49 and 6% of those 18 to 34 would be enthusiastic. That speaks about that enthusiasm gap. But then also 29% of those aged 18 to 34 said they would actually be angry if Biden were the nominee. So pretty problematic, up from just 7% not so long ago. Big challenge.
So, Kayleigh, you listen to these Democrats come up here, and they're talking about how much enthusiasm there is for Joe Biden. And it always amazes me, the willingness of politicians to destroy their own credibility by just saying things that, like, anybody can look around and say, yeah, that's not true.
Right. And that's why they're having to send out people like Kamala Harris, the vice president, on The View this week. And if you looked, I believe she got some media training. She hit, if I'm a political operative, I'm going check on her appearance because she brought up student loans over and over again. She's asked about January 6th. She starts to pivot back to abortion. Right. She was very much on message. She talked about Israel and Gaza. It was clearly an effort to bring back progressives, bring back young people, where I wouldn't underestimate the Democrats among young people. They know how to utilize TikTok. Before the midterm elections, they brought in TikTok users to D.C. They met with Obama. They met with President Biden. They had a universe of tens of millions of voters that they reached just like that.
So, Guy, we're short on time, but, I do think it's important to talk about this write-in campaign for Joe Biden. Because Democrats killed the primary in New Hampshire, this is so on point, they're now going to have a fake election on Tuesday in which voters will not be heard.
Oh, they've rigged the system for Joe Biden because he is so weak, not just among voters broadly, but young people in particular. That poll, 50% say they'd be angry or dissatisfied, young voters, if he's the nominee. Yikes. Very quickly on Kamala Harris, the vice president, saying, oh, Joe Biden is so insightful. He can see around the corner. Upcoming threats. Really? Yeah. Inflation? The border? Afghanistan? Name one thing where he's been prescient. What an absolute nonsense line that is.
Yeah, he's seeing things. It's just not the things that matter to people. That was a joke.
I liked it. I laughed
well,
inside.
You could laugh.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.